Good evening. It is 6:27. Nobody has shown up for class just yet. Hopefully everybody got the invitation. And I will again send this invitation out to everybody. And hopefully if something happened where you didn't get it, let me know that. And I will do what I can to take care of that as well. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Boom. So I'm going to go ahead and send another invitation out if you're not there. So let me send that invitation out one more time in case that. All right, send it out again in case anybody was not able to get it a few moments ago. I just sent another invitation out to the same video, so please come on in, and we're looking forward to seeing you. We're picking up tonight with Proverbs chapter 15. I have really wrestled in my mind how I'm going to handle this. I did, by the way, I sent this to you in the email prior to this, that I am working on the midterm exam. I was working on that today after I had gotten back from the hospital, visiting one of our members, and I wasn't able to complete it. I will be completing it before too much longer, and I want you to know that hopefully this will be out in the next little bit of time. Hopefully by tomorrow afternoon, and we'll have that particular video. Again, I'm glad that you're taking this class, and if there's anything I could do to help you guys, let me know that. Hey, brother, how you doing?
Good. How are you, Tommy?
I'm better than I deserve. Good to see you there in Missouri. How's everything there?
Nice and warm.
Nice and warm. Wow. Well, we got that. But I heard something the other day on Facebook where Glenn Burns, you remember him, he's the guy here, says that come February 2nd, 7th, something like that, we're going to get another snowstorm. So I'm just looking forward to that with eager anticipation. But it has been many, many, many years that we've had this much snow in Georgia. So I'm not going to complain. We've come out all right. So yeah, we're down in the 50s and 60s here now, much, much warmer than it has been. And we're just rocking along. We're picking up tonight with Proverbs 15. I was mentioning earlier that I'm sending out the midterm to, probably tomorrow. Got that done. I was going to get it done today, but spent a little bit more time at the hospital with somebody. Also trying to figure out exactly how I'm doing Proverbs. Trying to give some time with Ecclesiastes, and it's been a real thing. What I actually thought about doing was kind of skipping over from chapter 15 and going on over to chapter 22, where we start seeing a shift in the writers and so forth. And again, what's happened with all that is that I'm still trying to figure out the best way to handle this in a way that again, we can see exactly what's going on. So best thing I know to do right now tonight is just kind of go back where we picked up off of and go from there. We're beginning tonight in Proverbs chapter 15 about verse 5. We remember back in chapter 14 at verse 28, he talks about what a king should do, the advice for the rulers. And he emphasized the idea that in a multitude of people is a king's honor, but in the lack of people is the downfall of a prince. And then you come over to the 15th chapter, he emphasizes again this idea, 14:35, a king's favor is toward a wise servant, but his wrath is against him who causes shame. And then we come down to the 15th chapter, again emphasizing the idea that, think about how 15:1 and 2 emphasizes the idea, especially as a king, but all of us, how we need to watch what we say and how we say it. A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. And that should be true of kings, but it should be true of all of us, right? As we think about it for just a few moments. He emphasized the idea, the tongue of the wise uses knowledge rightly, but the mouth of fools pours forth foolishness. And I like this, and I appreciate this. If, as we've talked about, chapter 14:28 goes through the 15th chapter, I like the idea where he says the eyes of the Lord are in every place. What would happen today if all of those that are in leadership authority understood that idea? He keeps watch on the evil and the good. So he knows what everybody's doing. We know that there's many passages of scripture that emphasize the idea that God knows the hearts of man. We remember the Hebrew writer said that all things are naked and open unto him with whom we have to do. So here you have this idea that, again, God knows what's going on everywhere. He knows what's going on in the halls of Congress. He knows what's going on in the hearts of these men and women. He knows what's going on in the heart of Donald Trump and everybody all the way down. And that's true of every nation. And again, he's watching, keeping watch on the evil and the good. So again, think about how important that is, how comforting that is to realize that God is that way and taking care of things in that matter. And then he says, again, this idea of chapter 15, verse 1, picks back up again in verse 4, a wholesome tongue. And again, in my marginal reading in the scriptures right there, he says a healing tongue is a tree of life, but perverseness in it breaks the spirit. Think about how somebody somewhere down the line could be brokenhearted just by the words we say. We don't even mean to say it in a way maybe sometimes it comes across, but it does happen. And it's interesting that, again, he brings out how important our words are. And he's going to go on in chapter 15, verse 5 through 19, talking about the discipline of temper and how we need to control our temper and our tongue. Discipline is a very important word here. And indeed, we have 33 verses in this section as he begins to talk about this. 9 of these 33 verses are what we call Jehovah verses, or verses where God is mentioned here. So as he starts talking about this, he emphasizes again that a fool despises his father's instruction. As I was making up the midterm test, I was again impressed as I was reading that, how this book was mainly written to young men. And again, how you keep coming back to this over and over and over again. So a fool despises his father's instruction, but he who receives correction, again, verse 5, who keeps correction is prudent. So key words here: simple, prudent, fools, wise people. So as you're looking at all of that, he's emphasizing the idea that, again, the godly parents are always going to do what's best interest of the child. And I remember as I was trying to bring up my children, sometimes I didn't know what was the best interest of the child. I just tried to make the best decisions from what I knew, what the scripture says. And again, he stresses that idea. In the house of the righteous, there's much treasure, but in the revenue of the wicked is trouble. The house of the righteous. Okay, so a fool needs to listen to a fool is one who despises father's instruction, but he who receives correction is prudent. So you have in the house of the righteous, which again suggests the idea that you're doing what's right. There's a lot of treasure. Now we measure treasure a lot of times, again, by money. But again, sometimes it's not so much by money, but by the teaching that's brought out there. So he says the lips of the wise. So again, here you have this idea, the lips of the wise disperse knowledge. Again, they provide encouragement, enlightenment to everybody that hears them. But the heart of the fool is what? Does not do so. So again, the heart is parallel to the lips. Why? Because out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. So here you have that same idea that it is what we say comes from our heart. So again, think about how we have already brought this ideal out through the book of Proverbs as we've talked about it. The idea of when you listen to a man a very short period of time, you can tell whether he's a Christian in that short period of time or not. He goes on and talks about the wisdom and godly fear, verses 8 through 11. He says, the sacrifice of the wicked is an abomination to the Lord, but the prayer of the upright is his delight. The way of the wicked is an abomination to the Lord, but he who loves him who follows righteousness. So here you have the sacrifice of the wicked in verse 8, the way of the wicked. Both of those things are an abomination to the Lord. And again, these are those Jehovah passages that we're talking about. So God knows the way, the sacrifice and the ways of the wicked, but contrast that with the prayer of the upright. God loves to hear our prayers. And I sometimes wonder, especially in my own life, where prayer places, where the emphasis that I place on prayer. One person has said that it's like a loving father who knows or wants to know what's best in our life, who does know what's best in our lives at all times, but who winds up a lot of times listening to us. Do we pray enough? Do I pray enough? And again, you have the prayer of the upright is his delight. He delights in hearing from us. I delight in hearing from my children. I love hearing from my grandchildren. And again, we understand that you might be having a bad day, but a granddaughter can come up and give you a kiss and say, "I love you, Papa," and man, that's the rest of the world. I couldn't really give a care of what's going on at that moment in time. So again, think about this. The prayer of the upright is God's delight. And then in verse 9, he loves him who follows righteousness. So think about the tie-in the New Testament that brings out the idea that the only way God hears our prayers is if we're trying to live the life that he wants and what he expects in that respect. So again, if he will not hear the prayer of the wicked, John 9 gets in that big discussion whenever the man that was born blind was healed, and he brings out that God does not hear the prayers of the wicked. And again, that's brought out in the book of Psalms and other passages. So here's that idea that God loves to hear from his people, and when they're loving righteousness and doing what's right, God is going to watch over them and take care of them in every respect of the term. Then we go on a little further. Hell and destruction, verse 11, are before the Lord, and how much more the hearts of the sons of men. Again, emphasizing the idea that God knows our hearts. Sheol, hell, is translated in the New King James Version. Sheol is the abode of the dead spirits. The Abaddon is the actual Hebrew word here. Abaddon is the place of where the place of perishing, the lowest depths of hell, the abyss of the New Testament. Luke chapter 8, verse 31, and Revelation 9, verse 2. We don't know a lot of things that goes on after we die. We can't. But God knows all that. He knows everything that goes on. So his eye penetrates to the deepest corners of the world. So how much does he know about the hearts of the children of men now? So God, to us today, again, God today, think about it in this respect, he says the human heart, our hearts are an open book. Jeremiah 17, verse 10, I, the Lord, search the heart and test the mind to give every man according to his ways, according to the fruit of his deeds. So again, God knows us in that respect. Words, soft answer turns to wrath, chapter 15, verse 1. A wholesome tongue, verse 4, is a tree of life. Verse 7, the lips of the wise disperse knowledge. Again, the prayer of the upright is his delight. He now again talks about the idea of how many times he's talking about the lips here and how important that is. And again, trying to give out the right kind of lips. The word lips of encouragement. A scoffer does not love one who corrects him, nor will he go to the wise. Okay, so again, the mocker, the scoffer is somebody who's arrogant. They are either indifferent to religion or skeptical thereof. They're free thinkers. They resent anybody trying to set them straight. And they will mock those. And that's, again, another way they put it, mocking, scoffing, along that line. He will not go to the wise. He will not listen to anybody like that. He will not receive any instruction. And I hope and pray that all of us, myself above all, is willing to always receive instruction. The older I get, the more I realize how much more instruction I need. And it's interesting in that respect. A merry heart makes a cheerful countenance, but sorrow of the heart, the spirit is broken. Again, wisdom, cheerfulness. Again, a pleasant face. The face reflects the mood of the soul. So, but you can also tell whether or not somebody's spirit is broken, right? And sometimes I've even seen people whose heart was broken, spirit broken, but they were able to still smile. And that says a lot in that respect. The heart of him who has understanding seeks knowledge, but the mouth of fools feeds on foolishness. So again, where are our hearts? A merry heart makes a good countenance. There again is the heart of him who has understanding seeks knowledge. I hope and pray we'll never get too old to receive more knowledge, to learn things. And that's one of the things, as I've said before, I love teaching at the George School of Preaching because I've never taught on Proverbs before. I've never seen the cohesiveness this book has. And again, it does emphasize that idea of how wisdom is bringing it all together and how it's all tied in. He who is of a merry heart has a continual feast. All the days of the afflicted are evil. So again, you have this idea, always seek knowledge, always be looking for knowledge. And then he goes on in verse 15, he emphasizes if you are of a merry heart, then you'll have a continual feast as you're striving to learn more and more and more and more and more. So again, as one brother would put it, Solomon's encouraging positive thinking. You know, even if a person's poor, he can still find life enjoyable if he does not cultivate, or if he has a cheerful spirit. So again, all of these things are tied in together. Better is a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure with trouble. Better is a dinner of herbs, or again, that vegetables where love is, than a fatted calf with hatred. So again, here you have this idea of the fear of the Lord that was brought out. Hey, brother, chapter 1 at verse 7. Again, this is a key phrase through the book, is the idea of understanding what the fear of the Lord is. So he emphasizes the idea. It's better for us to have the fear of the Lord and a little bit in this life than having a lot of the good things in this life, the fatted treasure, the great treasure, the fatted calf. He said it's better. And in chapter 15, verse 16, 17, brother. So glad you made it. Glad you made it. Always glad you made it. Well, all righty. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate that. I do. I do. So, years ago, I cannot remember exactly how he put it, but the comedian Jerry Clower made a comment on this passage. He says, it's better just to eat a bunch of turnip greens day in and day out, where love is, than to eat a 6-course meal where there's what? Where there's hatred. And I like what he had to say there in that respect, because it's so true. And sometimes we have to quote it back in a different way that maybe we can understand it a little bit better. But that was his, not necessarily inspired commentary on it, but obviously his comment on this particular passage. Chapter 15, verse 18 emphasizes again, 18 and 19, a wrathful man stirs up strife. So he again is telling us and emphasizes the idea that we need to watch and control our anger, to control our temper, to control the thing. And again, why? Because think about it. If we live a life of anger all the time, we're not going to be very happy. We're going to be miserable.
I was talking with somebody about anger today.
Uh-huh.
And the person said, this is who I am. And I said, then he quotes scriptures where God said, be angry and sin not. I said, yes. But God did not say to walk around with the anger.
Mm-hmm.
So you're to be angry and you to handle it in a righteous way, right, and get rid of it, but you're not to carry it and walk around with it.
Yeah. Because again, anger will get us to the point where we're stressed out. It's going to affect us physically, definitely emotionally. And again, if we're a person that's very quick to anger, why? Let's stop and talk about that for just a moment. Why do we get angry?
Well, because someone offended you. Okay.
Or we think we're not getting our particular way that we want at that particular moment in time. And in both of the things that you just said, the fact that somebody has offended you or we're not getting our way, anger has its seat in what? Selfishness a lot of times, more often than not. So we need to look at that and honestly say, am I being selfish here, or am I Jesus was angry. I've often made the point that there is righteous anger and unrighteous anger. You're right, the Bible passage says, be angry and sin not. But Paul will also argue that put away all the anger, the wrath, the clamor, and all these other things. Put that stuff away from you. So, yeah, that's right. And Paul does emphasize that idea. So we need to get to the point where, again, we're not wearing our feelings on our sleeve. We're not trying to get people to follow our way all the time. Our way is not necessarily the best way. As an elder of the Lord's church, I think a lot about this, and I try to think more about what the church needs rather than what I want, and what might be best for the church rather than what I want. Sometimes, let's also be honest, sometimes we get that kind of confused. If I get what I want, that's what's going to be best for the church. And that may not necessarily be the case, right?
Right.
So, and again, it's because we get to thinking my will is equal to the Father's will. Our will needs to be equal to the Father's will, but we need to know his will to get our will in line with his will. So again, it's interesting as he thinks about this whole idea of anger and again, how it is. And it's something I struggle with. And I think all of us from time to time struggle with it. So it's something that we need to work on in our lives. He who's slow to anger allays contention. He's one who puts it off, then he's not going to be discussing that as much, or he's not going to be in fights as much. So as we go on here, he comes to verse 19. The way of the lazy man is like a hedge of thorns. The way of the upright is a highway. A hedge of thorns. A lazy man fails to trim his hedges. So he's going to have thorns that are going to protrude. And so if he's trying to move along his path, if he's walking down a path and he's not trimming his hedges, he's going to be cut up, right? He's a lazy man. But the path of the upright people is what? It's a highway. What does that mean? I think of I-20. I think of I-285. Big old 6 lanes of traffic. You're not going to get hurt. You know, they tread their path in life resolutely and trustfully. And they're not trying to be lazy about this. They're doing exactly what, God wants and expects of them to do. Now we come to another section, all right? Another great section of this great collection of Proverbs. And remember, there's a break at about chapter 22. So we're still about, 7 chapters away in that respect. And when I'm talking about the break, because there you have the break from Solomon's Proverbs to some of these other Proverbs. So, and what I thought about actually doing was just skipping through the rest of this and then going on to chapter 22. But again, there's just so much meat in here, we need to really look at it. So I think as we're continuing to look at this and think about this for just a moment, we understand, I think, again, as one brother has, and as I'm following this particular outline of this particular brother, he emphasizes from chapter 15, verse 20 through the 19th chapter, verse 25, it's now all about making the right choices. Yeah. And again, think about how our young people need this and how those of us that are older need to hear this always, right? It's, again, it starts off with what? A wise son, right? Why was the book of Proverbs written? This is going to be on the midterm. It was written by a father to his son to try to give him wisdom and how to live life. So here you have, in a very real sense, you have a break, and that's emphasizing this idea that again, a wise son does what? He's going to make his father glad. Why? He's going to make the right decisions. And again, when you go back to chapter 15, verse 20, go back to chapter 10 verse 1. Chapter 10 verse 1, a wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son is the grief of his mother. Chapter 13 in verse 1, a wise son heeds his father's instruction, but a scoffer does not listen to rebuke. And so then we have chapter 15 at verse 20, a wise son, yet again. So you see he's trying to bring these out. Both they're trying to, it seems like as this brother wrote here, that this is trying to set off a distinct set of proverbs in every one of these situations. It always starts with this ideal of a wise son. Now again, how many times, I don't know that I would have caught it, but how many times would we have caught that connection 10:1 and 13:1 and now in 15:20? I don't know. All right. So as we're looking at this and going further in this, let's notice again the contrast between the wicked and the righteous. All righty. We read this all the way through chapter 15:20 through chapter verse 33. Let's just read through it. A wise son makes a father glad, but a foolish man despises his mother. Remember, again, one of the Proverbs says, a foolish son hurts his mother. Folly is joy to him who is destitute of discernment. What is folly? It's the opposite of wisdom. It's foolishness. It's craziness. It's being fooled, It's joy to him who is destitute of discernment or destitute of heart, but a man of understanding walks uprightly. Without counsels, plans go awry, but in the multitude of counselors, they are established. Oh, how we need to listen to counsel and how we need to listen to, first off, and we're trying to make a decision in our lives, we need to go and see what the Bible says about it. Then we need to go to men that are wiser and older than us to listen to what's going on to hopefully give us some advice. How often do we do that? How often have I made a mistake in not doing that like I should? And maybe all of us from time to time have made that mistake. A man has joy by the answer of his mouth, and a word spoken in due season, how good it is. The way of life winds upward for the wise, that he may turn away from hell, Sheol, below. So again, there's that word Sheol, which again could simply mean the place of the departed spirits, as opposed to what? The place that we think is burning with fire and brimstone. Gehenna, right, in the Greek. The Lord will destroy the house of the proud, but he will establish the boundary of the widow. The thoughts of the wicked are an abomination to the Lord, but the words of the pure are pleasant. He who is greedy for gain troubles his own house, but he who hates bribes will live. The heart of the righteous studies how to answer. I love that proverb. If we're righteous, we need to stop and think before we say something, right? Stop and think the thing through. But the mouth of the wicked just spouts off what? Evil things. But and again, think about it in that respect. Sometimes if we've not thought a thing through in that respect, then what happens? Well, what often happens if we're not thinking it through like we should is the fact that, again, we say things that we wind up regretting later. So we need to, as much as we possibly can, study, think about it, study how to answer. I love that phrase, studying how to answer. The Lord is far from the wicked, but he hears the prayers of the righteous. Now, we've already talked about that earlier in the chapter, how important it is that God, verse 8 of chapter 15, says the prayer of the upright is his delight. Here again, he hears the prayer of the righteous. This could be one of those passages that I alluded to in John chapter 9, where he says, the blind man, after he was healed by Jesus, in this controversy with the Pharisees, he says, we know that God does not hear the prayers of sinners. So here you have, the Lord is far from the wicked, but he hears the prayers of the righteous. And that's always should always be a comforting fact to us. Again, think about, as I've said before, there's about 10 or 12 verses in this passage, beginning with chapter 15, verse 4, and going on, where you have the ideal of the Lord, the Jehovah passages here. And then the light of the heart rejoices, the light of the eyes rejoices the heart, and a good report makes the bones healthy. Again, healthy is what? Fat. It suggests the ideal of marrow and having plenty of marrow. So again, the light of the eyes rejoices the heart. So as we're looking through all of this, it's tying it all together. Verse 31, the ear that hears the rebuke of life will abide among the wise. So we need to listen to rebukes. None of us like to be rebuked. None of us like to be reproved. None of us like to sit down and be told that, well, you're wrong here, right? But it's good that we do. Listen to it. Think about it. He who disdains instruction despises his own soul, but he who heeds rebuke gets understanding. And then again, tie it back in. The fear of the Lord is the instruction of wisdom. So here we have again this fear of the Lord, chapter 1 at verse 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, right? So here he ties it again. This is the instruction of wisdom, and before honor is what? Humility. So again, do we have really a lot to be proud about? Not really. In one sense, we don't, do we? So we need to be careful, be very careful about what's going on. Now, kind of coming back to this, verse 20 through 24, again, look at the ideal of what he's trying to say here. He's talking about accepting advice, right? He's talking about a wise father giving him, so listen to your father. The ideal of verse 21, he's talking about the ideal of understanding. Have a heart full of understanding. The man of understanding walks uprightly. Verse 22 and 23, we need to look for that counsel, look for advice. And so he emphasizes that we need to be accepting advice and get it in the right way, because we want to make sure we go the way of life upward. Upward. And again, how often is that ideal? When we talk about somebody going upward, we're talking about somebody getting closer to God, because God is supposedly in heaven, right? But when a man's going his path downward, I think about maybe running down a hill. A lot of times when you're going down a hill, you can get carried away. Yeah. Think about it from another viewpoint. When you're going up, walking up a hill or something like that, and one of the things I want to try to do this year, I don't know if I'll do it or not, but I drive by Kennesaw Mountain a lot, going to the hospital and all. And I said, you know what? I did it many years ago, but I thought I'd like to just walk up that mountain again. Just walk up it, okay?
I know I can't do it.
Now, here's the thing. I want you to think about this for just a moment. Walking up is tough. It's a struggle. You really got to work hard to walk up. It's not too hard to run down.
Nah.
and you think about it, could that tell us something about righteousness? That if we're going to be right, the way of life upward winds upward, it's going to be a struggle. But we have to do it so that we will not wind up in hell, right? Think about the wickedness here as these ways wickedness, the ultimate judgment. The Lord will destroy the house of the proud. So again, he's emphasizing this idea. What? God's going to pluck it up. He's going to pull it up. Isn't it interesting? He emphasizes the proud, but then in verse 33, he said, before honor is humility. So what do we need to be striving for? We need to be striving for that humility, right? Yeah. The offensive. Wickedness offends God, right? The thoughts of the wicked are an abomination to the Lord. So we need to just get rid of those thoughts. Greedy for gain. The mouth of the wicked pours forth evil. So again, over and over and over again, as we've read through this a few moments ago, we see the contrast and see how sometimes that gets us in the situation. Where is the Lord? He's far from the wicked, but he hears the prayers of the righteous.
You know,
So,
this proverb to tear you up.
yeah, they do.
I mean,
They really, really do.
I mean, Romans 6, 7, and 8.
Yeah.
You know, you're not, there's no condemnation, all that. But this right here, it really dissects you.
Yes, it does. It makes us really think about where we're going, what we're doing. Do we have the fear of the Lord? All right. Chapter 16 mainly deals with the idea, the whole chapter is talking about man under God, okay? Let's talk about the heavenly king. What do we know about the Lord? Well, look in verses 1 through 9. The preparations of the heart belong to man, and again, the plans of the heart, but the answer of the tongue is from the Lord. All the ways of man are pure in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the spirit. Commit your works to the Lord, and your thoughts will be established. The Lord has made for all for himself. Yes, even the wicked for the day of doom. Okay, so you start looking at that. The Lord, the Lord, the Lord, the Lord. So we need to live our lives what? Always in view of the Lord, right? The Lord has made all for himself. I said that a moment ago. Verse 5, everyone proud in heart is an abomination to the Lord. Though they join forces, none will go unpunished. In mercy and truth, atonement is provided for iniquity, but by the fear of the Lord, one departs from evil. Chapter 1 at verse 7, chapter 15 at verse 33, the instruction of wisdom. The fear of the Lord causes us to depart from evil. When a man's ways please the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. Better is a little with righteousness than vast revenues without justice. A man's heart plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. I don't know about you, but as I was looking at this passage and thinking about it and wanting to get ready to teach it, I thought, man, this would make a good sermon. Just these first 9 verses of chapter 16. Yeah. How the Lord has what needs to happen. How he weighs our spirits. We commit our works to him. He made everything for himself. He says, the proud in heart are an abomination. The fear of the Lord is one who departs from evil. All of these things, if a man's heart plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. So think about it. God tests human motives. God acknowledges humility. He knows what's going on in our hearts and in our lives. And again, verses 7 and 8, he is providing deliverance. Number one, he acknowledges humility. Verses 1 through 4, he is the Lord that he knows your heart. He knows your motives. He understands your humility. And then again, he has this deliverance. All righty. Verse 10 through 15. Now, here is the heavenly king, right? Our heavenly king is the Lord. Beginning in verse 10 and going through verse 15, again, you have what? The earthly king. Divination is on the lip of the king, but his mouth must not transgress in judgment. Honest weights and scales are the Lord's. All the weights in the bag are his work. So again, they're his concern. And again, going back to the Old Testament, in Leviticus 19 at verse 36, he says, just measures, just weight. How important is that in our country, in our culture? I was seeing something the other day. It was a YouTube video about one of the companies that produces peanut butter. And they made an argument. They said, you know what? These companies, a lot of them will say, you know, we are keeping our price of peanut butter, whatever it is they're selling, at the same. But I don't know how many of us noticed this. I didn't. But if you look, years ago when they would have a little jar of peanut butter, especially the plastic jar, the bottom would be level. Now, it's got a hump in the bottom. They're not selling the same amount now that they were. And even that little bitty, as I said it, that little bitty hump in the middle is saving them money because why? They're not giving you what you're paying for. Now, they may be saying, we're not going to raise our prices. They're not, but they're not giving you what you used to get for it either.
Look at that little bit of amount they save from that jar. That over 1,000 jars, they can make more.
That's right.
So the profit increase.
That's exactly right. And they understand that. So it's interesting, again, as you've talked about this idea of what the Lord does, then you start looking at what the kings need to be doing. Again, kings need to be people of what? Of righteousness. They need to do what the Lord wants. His mouth must not transgress. He needs to have honest weight and scales. It's an abomination, verse 12, for kings to commit wickedness, for a throne is established by righteousness. Righteous lips are the delight of kings. So I submit unto you, this is not so much the idea that the kings love to hear righteous lips as much as they need to be speaking righteously. They need to be telling the truth. It's an abomination for kings. If we translate that today in 21st century America, it's an abomination for presidents and senators and congressmen to commit wickedness. The throne is established by what? Doing what's right. So again, righteous lips are the delight of kings, both in what they hear and also we need to tell the truth. We need to be people that tell the truth, and kings need to tell the truth. So as messengers of death is the king's wrath, but a wise man will appease it. So if you have done something against the king, what you need to do if you're a wise man is appease the king so that you won't die, right? And then again, in the light of the king's face is life, and his favor is like a cloud of the latter rain. So again, here you have this idea of the divine power of judgment. God is going to judge these kings. And again, I hear all the stuff and all the brouhaha about a lot of our senators and stuff like that. They're men just like us, and they're going to be judged one of these days. They're going to receive the greater judgment because they've been placed in more levels of authority. Just like elders are going to receive the greater judgment. So it's something to think about. But again, think about the idea that we need to do what we can. And as he's talked about the heavenly king, now he's talked about the earthly king and what needs to happen. Now from 16 to verse 23, we talk about the right choices. How much better to get wisdom than gold? So what do I need more than anything else? Wisdom. How do I get that? Getting in the Word of God, right? Having that understanding. Also living life, right? Are you going to say something wrong?
No.
Oh, okay. And to get understanding is to be chosen rather than silver. The highway of the upright is to depart from evil. So when we're talking about living the right life and doing what's right, what do we need to do? You need to go down the highway and get away from evil. He who keeps his way preserves his soul. So just stay as far away from it as you can. Here's the wisdom that you really need. Number one, avoid evil. Get away from that every way you can. Make a conscious choice to walk on the side of the upright. Verses 18 through 20. Pride goes before destruction and the haughty spirit before a fall. That's one of those proverbs we remember, right? That's one we remember. But again, look at the very next verse. Better to be of humble spirit with the lowly than to divide the spoil or the plunder with the proud. So again, you need to cultivate humility. Pride is an offense before God. Proverbs chapter 6, we've already studied that a proud look is something that God abominates. He hates it. Again, why? Pride causes us to sit back and say, this is what I've done. This is what I have gotten. And we don't think about what God has done and how God has brought about these things in our lives. So again, if we are proud, we will be humbled by God one way or another. So again, there's that ideal of making sure that we're not proud. The humble, again, is the idea of not being proud. It's the ideal of, it's the opposite of the self-importance that we sometimes feel. Okay, so again, the humble are despised because sometimes they try to live and make money by honest means, right? And so he emphasizes this, and he says, listen, it's better to be of the humble spirit with the lowly than to divide the spoil with the proud. So you don't want to do that. Cast your lots with the humble. Cast your lots with those that are trying to work and do what they can in that way. And why do you think humility is so important?
Well, with humility, it's humility. It's not you. You're humbling yourself. You're lowering yourself.
Right.
You're being guided by an understanding than your own. You can fool yourself.
That's right. That's right. And again, is it not the case in our lives, especially even as Christians, our biggest struggle is with ourselves and what we want? Humility manifests itself in obeying what God says. That's a simple thing. So he says, whoever trusts in God, what? Verse 20, whoever trusts in God, happy is he. So he who heeds the word wisely will find good, and he who trusts in the Lord, happy is he. So there's that, again, that very simple idea. If we're proud, we're not going to listen to the word of God. We're going to try to do it our way. And what winds up happening is we mess up.
Another person that they're in the body of Christ, they always will, but the Bible says also God reigns on the just as well as the unjust. And they boast about how blessed they are, but they won't serve God with humility. They enjoy blessings, and they feel like, okay, I'm okay because God's still blessing me.
And we equate those blessings with God's favor. And we, a lot of times, like you said, will not use humility and honor God in our service. You're right.
And that's his heart also,
Yeah.
He does what we want to do.
Right. And that's happens so often. It's not just, it happens so many in the church and out. Well, I know God's blessing me, so I know I must be right. And again, it's just health and wealth religion. I receive the blessings because I'm doing what's right. That's not necessarily the case. Sometimes you could be receiving blessings and earthly blessings and live a wicked life.
Yeah, and some things, people don't talk about it. Some things are just fate.
Right.
Some things just come your way.
That's right.
It doesn't mean God had a hand in it. You just happen to be at the right place at the right time. You go for that application. They happen to be hiring. You happen to be looking. They happen to be hiring. Right place at the right time. That was fate.
It's not fate, but yeah, I know what you're trying to say. I do know what you're trying to say. I agree. So we've got to be careful. We've got to make sure that we are, this, as I said, this is very important. Who is happy? The one who is what? Doing what the Lord and trusting in the Lord. That's the one who's really happy. And a poor person can trust in the Lord. In fact, it may be easier for a poor person to trust in the Lord because you don't have a lot of riches to trust, right?
Well, you gotta have more of a humble heart because you don't have the abundance.
That's right.
So
that's exactly right.
The dependency is going to be, more on God to provide for him.
That's right. That's right.
He's going to have a more sincere heart.
And again, it's easier. It's easier when we're humble to have that sincere heart. All right. The wise in heart will be called prudent, and sweetness of the lips increases understanding. So again, the wise in heart are what? They're going to speak wisely. All right. Understanding is a wellspring of life to him who has it, but the correction of fools is folly. Think about that idea. Sometimes it's hard to try to correct a fool. They're not going to listen, right? And again, it's just folly. The heart of the wise. Now notice these next, the wise in heart, verse 21. Then again, key in on the idea of not just the wise in heart, but key in on the idea of, going back a little bit further here, key in on the idea of the heart of the wise teaches his mouth. The wise in heart will be called prudent. Pleasant words are like honeycombs. Well, here's a group of proverbs that emphasizes that if we are wise in heart, then we're what? We're going to be, you're going to hear it. Pleasant words are like a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul. So you're listening to them, what they say. They're wise. Their wisdom gives discernment. And remember what we studied back in Proverbs 15. We think about a matter before we say anything about it. And then when we speak, hopefully we're speaking words of wisdom that will encourage not just us, but everybody else that's around us. And again, it all comes from the fear of the Lord and having that proper respect and reverence and humility to accept the Lord's will above everything else. So, chapter 16 and verse 25, here's the consequences of our choices. There is a way that seems right to a man, but the end thereof is the way of death. So we've got to be careful we're choosing the right way, right? Look at chapter 14 and verse 12. There's a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. So there's this proverb repeated again. And again, we might sit there and think, well, as they're writing this, they're just throwing it all together. But have we seen now that you see this proverb in both situations, Proverbs 14:12, and again, Proverbs chapter 16, verse 25, is ending a section that is talking about how we use our lips and what wisdom and what all is involved in doing that. All righty? So again, I hope you're seeing, as I'm learning myself, as I'm going through this myself, I hope you're seeing just how cohesive this really is. It is good stuff. All right, let's read 26 through 30. He's now going to warn us about troublemakers. And who are some of the troublemakers? The person who labors for himself, for his hungry mouth drives him on. So the hungry man, all right? Hunger's a powerful incentive to get a person to work, right? If you're hungry enough, you'll do it. But that's sometimes not the best incentive, right? Because some people will engage in work because they're hungry that is not in keeping with God's will. They will try to find the quickest way to make a quick buck. And again, work is beneficial to mankind as long as we're choosing the right kind of work. So we've got to be careful. The person who labors for himself. Verse 27, the worthless man, an ungodly man. And again, the New King James, a man of Belial is the literal phrase. A man of Belial digs up evil, and it is on his lips like a burning strife. So he hears a story, and then he's got to tell everybody about it. So that's really what he's again, it's to evil words, slander, words of enticement. Again, his speech is like a scorching fire. All it does is harm and hurt others. Verse 28, a perverse man. So you have a laboring man, an ungodly man, or a man of Belial. A perverse man shows strife, and a whisperer separates the best of friends. Okay, so he's always turning things upside down. He perverts truth intentionally to create strife and discord. And how does God feel about those who create discord among the brethren? Proverbs chapter 6. He abominates them. So again, there's that idea. So a whisperer, a backbiter, again, some of the translations there, separates the best of friends as he's saying that. And again, think about how those simple words a lot of times have caused a lot of problems. So you have the hungry man, the worthless man, the perverse man, verse 29, a violent man. A violent man entices his neighbor and leads him in a way that is not good. He's a career criminal. In other words, he's wronged others by fraud or oppression. And again, he tries to lead his friends in a path that is a life of crime. And then verse 30, he winks his eye to devise perverse things. He purses his lips and brings about evil. Here's the guy who, have you ever seen anybody talk about somebody else? And then they'll kind of wink at you like, I got a lot more to say about that. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's the idea. That's the slanderer. He's there. He's going to tell all the bad that he possibly can. He's letting more, or he knows more than he lets on. And so a wise person needs to watch. A wise person needs to watch somebody that what? Wink in the eye. That's, yeah, you need to listen to what I'm trying to say. You need to watch out for that, right? Right. All right. Some concluding reminders. The silver-haired head is a crown of glory. If it is found now, if you're looking in the New King James Version, that word if is what? In italics would suggest it was added by the translators. All righty. So the silver-haired man is what? It's the man that is older, got gray hair. Again, a lot of times the longer a man lived is viewed as the grounding blessing of the Lord upon the life of one who lives by God's word. You think about this idea. Some of the older men in the Old Testament, whenever Jacob appears before Pharaoh, he tells him, 137 years I've lived and my days have been evil and few, right? So it's interesting in that respect. It emphasizes the idea that we need to have a respect for those that are older. A lot of times we don't. Leviticus chapter 19 at verse 32, it says these words, you shall stand up before the gray head and honor the face of an old man, and you shall fear the Lord, the Lord your God, for I am the Lord. Do we respect those that are older? Okay. In pagan societies, as in our society a lot of times, we don't respect those that are older because they can't do what they once did, and they become then a burden to us, right? And that should never be looked at in that respect. We need to go to them for wisdom. So you have this ideal of a man that is older, you respect him. Verse 32, he who's slow to anger is better than the mighty. He who rules the spirit than he who takes a city. So here's a man that you need to look at yourself. It's the idea of self-control. Self-control is much more superior to physical strength. So, be slow to anger. We talked about this at the very beginning. And again, we kind of emphasize it again. And then he said, the lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord. So again, the lot was employed a lot of times religiously in cases where you couldn't make a good decision. They would throw a lot. The lot was not to supersede common prudence or careful investigation. A lot of the Jews really believed that when they threw the lot, God was guiding that in one way or another. Think about it even in the New Testament, whenever they cast lots, and Matthias was chosen to take Judas's place in Acts chapter 1. So again, you have them, you have these cast, they're all thrown into a garment, and then the lot is brought out there and it's cast into the lap. So that's the ideal of it. All righty, let's take about a 10-minute break, come back about 7:30, and then we'll keep on going. We're rocking and rolling. Did better than we did last week. Covered 2 chapters last week, and in 2 hours. Now we're getting to 2 chapters in an hour, so maybe we're getting rocking along here a little bit better. All right, let's take about a 10-minute break. Let me wet my whistle a little bit more. How you doing, brother?
Good. You too.
I appreciate you, bro.
Yeah, I told Riley when I said.
We are picking up with chapter 17. Picking up chapter 17 of Proverbs. And here he's now talking about verses 1 through 9, the ideal of tranquility, the ideal of peace, the ideal of getting along, okay? He talks about in verses 1 through 3, the ideal of domestic tranquility, living with your wife and all at home and your servants, etc. Verses 4 and 5, he talks about the community. And then in verses 6, he talks about tranquility in old age. In verses 7 and 8, he talks about judicial tranquility. And then verse 9 talks about what? It's talking about interpersonal tranquility, how we bring about peace. So let's kind of look at all of these things individually. Domestic tranquility, verses 1 through 3. Better is a dry morsel with quietness than a house full of feasting or what? Sacrificial meals with strife. So again, Jerry Clower, it's better to eat when you don't have a whole lot there, but you got peace in your home, rather than eating a whole bunch of food and they're arguing about something all the time. I was reading, interestingly enough, again, about some of the stuff I read on Facebook about how families now, right around Thanksgiving and Christmas, when they get together, they have to call peace treaties, lest they get into talking about politics or something along that line. So again, think about how important it is that we have this. A home without love, however luxurious, is a place of misery. Dry beds soaked in wine or water before it was eaten was better than what? Eating something really big, as long as you got love in it. A wise servant will rule over a son who causes shame and will share an inheritance among the brothers. So again, here you have a wise man who respects his servant. He gives his servant his freedom and even blesses his servants. Okay? So again, as you think about it, and then he says, the refining pot is for silver, but the Lord tests the hearts. And again, how we've seen this as we've gone through here, where God always is showing here, he's testing our hearts. He knows what we're thinking. He knows what we're doing. He knows why we do what we do. He knows the motives behind our actions when we don't. And so many times we don't realize that, and or don't think about the implications of that, I should say. If God knows my heart and knows why I do what I do, then there's really, on the day of judgment, there's not going to be anything I can say to God about that, right? There's no way I could justify that in that respect. So, what is a refining pot? A refining pot was whenever a silversmith would put the silver in there and heat the pot up, and he would keep his eyes on the silver. And again, I've not ever seen it done. I've not even seen a YouTube video of it, but they're sitting there watching that silver the whole time. And whenever that silver gets to a certain temperature, the bad part of the silver comes to the top. The dirt or whatever comes to the top, and he just barely scrapes that off. So whenever you finally get to the end of it, you have nothing but pure silver. Do the same thing with gold. You burn off the impurities. You scrape off those things that would make it less than pure. So what's he talking about here? When he's talking about this domestic tranquility, where does it really start? Well, think about it in this respect. The Lord tests the heart. The bad things of a man's heart or the good things of a man's heart is going to come when? When you go through testing. You're going to see a man as he really is when he's going through testing, right? So looking at it from that viewpoint, that's what he's talking about there. The Lord tests the heart. How does God test our heart? Through the trials he gives us. And so we should count it all joy, as Peter as well as Paul will emphasize, when we go through these, and James chapter 1 verse 2. Count it all joy when you go through manifold temptations or trials. For the trying of your faith produces what? Patience. And let patience have its perfect work. So again, that word patience comes from a Greek word that says you bear up under. That helps you to be stronger. Struggles help us to be stronger. None of us like them, but the Bible does applaud and talk about how important they are in our lives. All right. What about community tranquility? Verses 4 and 5. An evildoer gives heed to false lips. A liar listens eagerly to the spiteful tongue. He who mocks the poor reproaches his maker. He who is glad at calamity will not go unpunished. So listen to the thing, an evildoer is what? He's listening to all the lies and the gossip. All right. A liar listens eagerly to a spiteful. Destructive is the actual Hebrew word there, suggesting that. And again, think about the man who mocks the poor. All right, you show your contempt for your maker. You are what? You're delighting in others' misfortune, even if they are our enemy. Is selfishness and malice. Okay, and again, that's what sometimes some people do. Job will say in Job 31, verse 29, if I've rejoiced at the ruin of him who hated me or exulted when evil overtook him, he said, God, punish me for what I've done. So again, God is the one who makes poor and makes rich. 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 7. So if we mock a person's poverty, we're mocking God. God knows what we can handle. I've often said, I think about what I'd do if I won the Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes. But God also knows that I can't handle that, so he's not going to allow me to get it. That's why I don't even bother that's why I don't even bother to get in there, okay? Think about again, verse 6. Children's children are the crown of old men, and the glory of children is their father. So what is the tranquility? A large number of children guarantee the stability of the family. And so eagerly, children a lot of times brag about their dads when they have the chance, until they get older and they think their dads are what? Are crazy. So again, here's a father who is encouraged. That's encouragement for us to live honorably, so that our children may be proud of us. But more importantly than that, our God may be proud of us, right? That's right. All right. Verses 7 and 8. Excellent speech is not becoming to a fool, much less lying lips to a prince. So the idea here is the lip of excess, the person that is overbearing in his speech. So he says, that's it's not becoming to a fool, much less lying lips to a prince. So we don't need to be engaging in that. All right. And think about how that should be peace. Excellent speech. A present is a precious stone in the eyes of its possessor. Wherever he turns, he prospers. All right. So again, a bribe, a present, a bribe sometimes might be a way to look at that. The proverb does not commend taking bribes. It's a forbidden practice, but it's simply stating a fact that a lot of times people will bribe, and that's what encourages us to what? Say things and do things we shouldn't do, right? And then verse 9, he who covers a transgression. That's how we should treat one another. We should cover it. We shouldn't be bragging or talking about other people's problems and their sins. I have enough sins of my own. I have enough struggles of my own. So again, it's the ideal of transgression, not so much against society, but against one another. So he who covers a transgression seeks love. Covers a transgression how? We overlook the offense. Should we overlook sin? No. We need to reprove it. But transgressions, a lot of times, there's another word for sin, is it not? So again, it's need to be one of those things where we need to look at it from the viewpoint, all right, maybe somebody has actually sinned against us. Should we be looking for our pound of blood, pound of flesh? No. If we're truly trying to be like God, we're going to be looking for forgiveness and reconciliation.
And in the church today, people hold grudges, they don't realize it.
Yeah. And think about how that happens. And then so we hold the grudge, and then something else happens from that same particular person. And then it just blows up that much more out of proportion. What did Jesus come to do? He came to cover transgressions, to take away sins, to do away with all of these things. And we're grateful for that. We want God. We want God to do that. We desire God to do that. But again, it's the idea there are those as well who's always got to be what? Telling everybody else about what everybody else is doing wrong. And again, good Lord knows there's plenty of all of us doing things wrong, that we've got things going on. All right. So you have this chapter here that's talking about, again, the pursuit of tranquility, all these different ways. Now look at the disruptions of tranquility, verse 10 through 15. Rebuke is more effective for a wise man than 100 blows for a fool. So you have those that are rebellious, right? A fool is thick-headed. He pays no attention to correction, no matter how severe it might be. 100 blows on a fool, he's going to go out and continue to do the same thing, right? An evil man, so you have a foolish man, an evil man seeks only what? Rebellion, okay? and a cruel messenger will be sent against him. So what's happening here? Again, it's the same idea that the rebellious man is what? He may be rebelling against God. He may be rebelling against civil authority. But again, you're going to have a cruel messenger shall be sent against him. Cruel, why? Well, again, if it's let's suppose it is a police officer. He's going to be cruel in the fact that what? I can't show no pity. I have to do what has to be done in this respect. No mercy because you are rebellious. You are rebellious. The vicious, verse 12. Let a man meet a bear robbed of her cubs rather than a fool in his folly. Okay? The meaning of a bereaved bear with a man and the meaning of a fool in his folly. So you think about a bereaved bear, a bear that has lost her cubs. She is on the warpath. Mm-hmm. And he said, that's a fool in his folly. That's the way a fool is in his folly. There's really no verb in the Hebrew here in this particular passage of Scripture. So he says, you see the comparison? A bear that is robbed of her cubs, a fool that is in his folly. That's how senseless and insane the whole thing is, vicious. Verse 13, whoever rewards evil for good, evil will not depart from his house. The ingrate, the person that's not thankful. Again, he treats his fellow man with such contempt that nobody's going to come to his aid when he's in trouble. Right? Think about the contentious. The beginning of strife is like releasing water. Therefore, stop contention before a quarrel starts. So, strife. Sometimes we talk about the ideal of strife in the church, right? Where does it start? It's kind of like a small hole in a dam. And again, you probably remember some of the movies. I watched a lot of war movies, and I was thinking about Force 10 from Navarone, where they blew up down there at the bottom of that dam, and weakened it. And it's like, well, why aren't we dying? But that explosion created, and the next few views of the thing is that water pressure just blew a hole in the dam. Before you knew what was going on, the whole thing was gone. That's it. That's exactly it.
Did you watch the movie where he was there?
Yeah. Yes, I watched all you name it. I watched just about all those movies. Yeah, that's right. That's right. So the person here in this particular circumstance, again, the beginning of strife is like releasing water. Stop it before it starts. Stop it before it starts. The unjust, he who justifies the wicked and he who condemns the just, both of them alike are a what? An abomination to the Lord. Again, think about both of them are alike, are an abomination to the Lord. So again, think about this ideal of the unjust, those who acquitted a guilty person, the condemnation of an innocent person. That's the one that's an abomination. So we have another couple of abominations. Remember back in Proverbs chapter 6 through 9. There's those things that are an abomination to the Lord. All right, here's some of the keys to tranquility. All right, why is there in the hand of a fool the purchase price of wisdom, since he has no heart for it? Again, if a fool sought to purchase wisdom, he would not be able to do so. A fool can't purchase wisdom because he doesn't have the quality of mind to do it, right? He has no heart for it. He has no desire for it. Verse 17, we need to cultivate friendship. A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born of adversity. Again, friendships experience the ultimate test. And so the friend brother is there with support. Verse 18, a man devoid of understanding shakes hands in a pledge and becomes surety for his friend. Now, again, what does he mean, shaking hands in a pledge? Ooh, somebody just come back on or something there. All right.
That was me, Tommy.
Okay, that's not a problem, brother.
Sorry, my computer keeps cutting in and out. So
well, that's okay, brother.
It's because I'm so far away.
I was looking for a couple more of my students, and I'm sitting there. Okay, well, they're an hour late, but anyway, I rejoice that they're going to be here. But that's okay. I keep sitting getting the same message here that the internet connection here is unstable. So I'm hanging in there. So hang in there with all of us. Thank you, brother. I appreciate you. I really do. Where was I? A man devoid of understanding shakes hand in a pledge and becomes surety for his friend. It's the ideal again of what? you're making a pledge that you're going to pay it. So this is a man that is not wise. Don't become a surety for your friend. And again, be very, very careful about that. I remember, again, in my life that, you've got to be careful with that, because I've had a lot of people ask to go on alone, me to go on alone with them. And I'm thankful that I remember enough of the Proverbs not to do that, because this is very good idea. Very good idea. Verse 18, verse 19, he who loves transgression loves strife. So he who loves sin, what? He loves disagreeing. Think about how sin destroys us. It creates problems amongst ourselves. It creates problems in our own life, and it creates problems with those that we love. It creates problems in the church. It's sin. It's just, and we sometimes, the saddest thing to me sometimes is see members of the church that have been members of the church for years, and they got caught up in a practice they knew was wrong. And it's kind of like, number one, I'm sorry that we're having to do this. Number two, I don't know what possessed me. I don't know what caused me to do it, but you still got to deal with the consequences of those actions. And that's what, it hurts. So again, we need to understand that we need to try to stay as far away from sin, transgression, going beyond what God says, because that's going to create strife. So again, think about it in that respect. We need to live that humble lifestyle, stay as far away from hurting people that we possibly can. Now, again, we've got to be careful about that, because sometimes whenever you tell the truth, you're going to hurt people and things. We still have to tell the truth. Yeah. But we've got to be careful about the way we handle. Even that, we have to preach the truth in love. Ephesians 4:15.
That when not you tell somebody about themselves, but we may have to address something, and it's true, and they get mad at you because they got found out.
Yeah, and it happens, and you're just kind of sitting there thinking, well, but it does happen, and you got to try to bring them hopefully to the realization of what they've done wrong, and hopefully that they will change their lives. Because we're more concerned about the soul than we are the hurt feelings, and that's tough. It is tough sometimes. It is. Verse 20, he who finds a deceitful heart finds no good, and he who has a perverse tongue falls into evil. So again, there's that idea of a crooked heart, a warped mind that cannot think straight. They create hardship, misfortunes for himself. He creates antagonism. And again, what's going to wind up happening, the bottom line is he has a perverse tongue. He's going to fall into evil, and he's going to sit around and wonder what in the world is going on. Why is everybody treating me this way? Well, it's your own actions. And again, think about that's tranquility. Again, the problem is here's some keys. So I need to be consistent in my speech. Always watch what I'm saying. How many times in Scripture do we see, especially in the book of Proverbs, a warning about what we say and how we say it? We've got to be careful about that. Verse 21 through 25, parental tranquility. All right? So again, here's another, listen to this. He who begets a scoffer again is a mocker, does so to his own sorrow. The father of a fool has no joy. A merry heart does good like medicine, but a broken spirit dries the bones. A wicked man accepts a bribe behind the back and pervert the way of justice. Wisdom is in the sight of him who has understanding, but the eyes of a fool are on the end of the earth. And then you have verse 25, a foolish son is a grief to his mother and bitterness to her who bore him. So isn't it interesting? You have verse 21 through 25, and they're kind of tied together. Begets a scoffer, a foolish son. They're tied together, so we have to see, okay, what is he talking about here? A scoffer, a mocker. And again, the father of a fool has no joy. Why? Because he knows he's going to continue to make bad decisions. And no matter what you try to say to him, he's going to continue to make bad decisions. And there's no joy in that respect. So as we think about it in that respect, we need to make sure that we try to do what we can. Why? Well, if you have a son that is following in the evil, or the fool, then you won't have a merry heart. And the merry heart will not do good, like medicine. It's going to be a broken spirit. You're just going to be what? You're just despairing. There's no happiness there. You get depression affects us bodily and spiritually and everything else. A cheerful disposition affects our heart. But if, again, we're depressed, it dries up the bones. And there's the idea. And why? Because this father of this fool has begotten a scoffer. So think about, again, the wicked man. The scoffer could be a wicked man who's accepting a bribe behind the back. Or, again, going back to verse 23 in my margin, it says the ideal of from the bosom, kind of undercover. He's accepting a bribe undercover to pervert the way of justice. This is the way his son is. And it's hurting this father as a result. Wisdom is in the sight of him who has understanding, but the eyes of the fool are what? Onto the end of the earth. The ideal is he's going to look for everywhere to try to find some happiness, something somewhere along the line. He can't concentrate his mind, so his gaze wanders in all directions. He can't be satisfied. He's always going to be looking for everything. And he says they're all over the earth. So again, this foolish son is what? A bitterness to those who bring them up. Again.
Even with that, people who are in sin, and they looking for, not so much looking for happiness, but they're just looking for stuff here, there, and everywhere. And you try to bring them back to God. And you try to explain to them, the foolishness of their way. And their response, this is me, I know what I'm doing, I'm okay. And
right.
You're not.
You're not. That's right.
God's will.
That's right. That's so right. That's right. All right, look, last couple of verses here. To punish the righteous is not good. Okay. Nor to smite princes for their uprightness, for their integrity. Again, you have the ideal of a serious injustice, finding an innocent person. And then one that's more serious, that you take men of high character that are refusing to compromise and you strike them. You beat them for their uprightness. Okay, and again, that's it. So again, one who has knowledge does what? Spares his words. Again, I think I mentioned this last week. If not, I'll say it again. The older my dad got, the quieter he got. And I'm thinking to myself, I just hope and pray that I'm that way, that I would spare my words. And whenever I do open my mouth to say something, I'll say something worthwhile and that people will pay attention to. So even a fool, he said, is counted wise when he holds his peace. When he shuts his lips, he is considered perceptive. Silence sometimes is taken to be, or thought to be, evidence of a profound mind. And again, we need to be that way. We need to watch what we say and how we say it. Think about what we're saying and how we say it. Perhaps if we preachers were a little wiser, we would say less or talk less and say more. So we need to watch what we say and how we say it. All right, friends and foes, chapter 18. Friends and foes. All right. A man who isolates himself seeks his own desire. He rages against all wise judgment. A fool has no delight in understanding, but in expressing his own heart. So again, he's the self-willed, conceited person. He's isolating himself. He says, you know what? I don't care what everybody else thinks. I'm going to do what I want to do. He delights in differing from what everybody else says. He takes no advice from anybody else. He thinks nothing about the public interest. Think about how that's true. Again, there's some people in the church. They don't care about anybody else in the church but them, what they want, what they desire. And they're going to let everybody know what their thoughts and their desires are. And again, it's all boils down to what? It all boils down to him. He rages against all wise judgment. A fool that has no delight in understanding, but in expressing his own heart. In other words, again, he's not listening to anybody else. He's self-opinionated. He's always right. He's wiser than anybody else. He's lived through more and done more than anybody else. And therefore what? he has no understanding, but he loves to tell everybody what he's gone through some way, somehow or another. It's all about them. It's all about them. And a lot of times when I think of this, I think of the narcissist, that again, he's always got to tell everybody else what he's thinking. And everybody else that don't agree with him, they're just idiots, right? And again, we've met people like that. And don't they get under our skin sometimes? And again, so think about it in that respect. Think about, as you're looking at these friends and foes, think about, again, the speech and friendship. When the wicked comes, also contempt comes, and with dishonor comes reproach. The words of a man's mouth are deep waters. The wellspring of wisdom is a flowing brook. It's not good to show partiality to the wicked or to overthrow the righteous to judgment. A fool's lips enter into contention, and his mouth calls for blows. A fool's mouth is his destruction, and his lips are the snare of his soul. The words of a talebearer are like tasty trifles. They go down in the inmost body. So here you have, look, a man raging against all wise judgment, expressing his own heart. The words of a man's mouth are deep waters. A fool's lips enter into contention. So, this section here, verses 1 through 8, is talking about the lips, the lips, the lips. And as a man speaketh in his heart, so what is he? So again, he's just telling everybody what his heart is really about. So you have this arrogant speech. I know all the answers. Verse 3, you have this contemptuous speech. Okay? When the wicked comes, contempt also comes. The wicked man has contempt for others. For everything that is pure, good, lovely, as Paul would say in Philippians chapter 4, verse 8. He heaps abuse on everybody that tries to stop him in his evil courses. And all he says is doing nothing but bringing disgrace, dishonor, okay, and reproach. Verse 4, the words of a man's mouth are deep waters. The wellspring of wisdom is a flowing brook. So again, we need to watch what we say. We need to think about, the deep water suggests what? Something beyond the surface. Have you ever said something without thinking it through?
Yeah.
Are you a human being? That's the next question. And the reality is we've all done that. And a lot of times, sometimes when we've done that, it brings disgrace to us and people look down at us because we've said something that we didn't really think things through like we should have. So we need to be very careful about this. We need to make sure that we are a flowing brook, well of wisdom. We come up with wise words. So we need to be careful. It's not good to show partiality to the wicked or to overthrow the righteous. So here again is a speech that is used perhaps lying in a court of law, or the idea of showing partiality whenever you judge somebody. We're judging somebody not by the facts of the case, but by the speech. Now, again, in courtrooms all across this land today, how often have trials been won or lost over the speech of the attorney? And the facts in the case are ignored. Think about this idea in our court system. And please don't misunderstand me. I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not going to try to speak to this in detail. But why is it that some evidence is inadmissible? Have you ever thought about that? Could it be that the evidence that is inadmissible would make a difference in a trial? So again, I've often thought about the fact that we talk a lot again about justice in our country, but do we really have a real good concept of what justice is? Because again, inadmissible evidence, if a police officer doesn't do what he's supposed to do in the way that he's supposed to do it, and the suspect says something when he wasn't warned of his Miranda rights, then all that gets thrown out. Mm-hmm. The one thing I know about God's judgment is it will be just. There will be no inadmissible in his court, evidence in his court, because he will not only know what was done, but he'll know the motive behind everything, because he knows our hearts. So again, we cannot we've got to be careful. And you've got to take this very, very seriously in this respect. Verses 6 and 7, contentious speech. A fool's lips always enter into contention. What is contention?
There's strife also.
Strife, arguing, fussing, fighting. Have you ever met people that it seems like all they really love to do is get into a good scrap?
Yeah.
And again, they do it with their lips, and before you know what's going on, his mouth is calling for blows. All right, and that's it. And that's why we'll go on and say is the fool's mouth is his destruction, and his lips are the snare of his soul. He's saying things that kind of it's a generalized statement of the preceding thought. His words get him into trouble, right? And again, watch what you're doing. So again, he emphasizes the ideal about gossip as well. The words of a whisperer are like choice morsels, and they go down to the depths of the belly. A whisperer, a talebearer, it's a gossip. The juicy tidbits of gossip. They're always wanting that tidbit of gossip. And there's always somebody that's going to listen. Mm-hmm. There's always going to be somebody that wants every bit of juicy gossip that they could possibly get, right? And so we'll use them somewhere down the line, somewhere against somebody that we want to. The warning here, again, about our speech, we've got to realize that our speech does get us a lot of times into the trouble. And again, that friendship can be made stronger or worse because of our speech. Verse 9. What are some of our actions that should bring about good friendship? Well, number 9, verse 9, chapter 9. He's slothful in his work, his brother who him is a great destroyer. So I need to be what? I need to be industrious, right? I don't need to be wasting time. I'm working in some fashion. Work is a means of discipline. It's a means of sanctification. We become holy by doing the right kind of work. So again, whenever we're slothful, we're like a person that's ruined his own property. We're doing it to ourselves and to people that come around us. Verse 11 and 12. The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous run to it and are safe. The rich man's wealth is a strong city and like a high wall in his own esteem. So look here. Here's a man who trusts in God, okay? The man who trusts in God is a strong tower. The righteous run to it and are what? They're safe. They are secure. They're set on high. The rich man's wealth seems like it's nice, but wealth affords protection. But again, if that protection is used the wrong way, it's illusionary, right? Wealth could be here one day and gone the next. We can have a stock market crash like what happened in 1929. Or what do we call it? We didn't actually call the last thing a depression. We called it the Great Recession. Yeah. We wouldn't go so far as to say it's a depression. It's just a recession. Okay. So you see, that's it. He has a strong city. It's like a whole high wall in his own esteem, not in God's esteem. Now notice the contrast there. The man who trusts in the Lord, he does know that God's going to protect him. The rich man trusts in his wealth to protect him. But what? It seems, right? It's like a high wall in his own esteem. And riches can be gone just that quick. And that's what's troubling to us sometimes. We trust so much in that. Think about the parable of the rich, foolish farmer, right? Who said, I have great wealth. I'm going to tear down my barns and build bigger. And God says, you fool, tonight your soul shall be required of you. And then whose shall these things be? When we get into Ecclesiastes, Solomon will talk a lot about getting wealth, and then after you die, you give it to somebody that may not be able to handle the wealth. Think about how riches have been lost by one or two generations. When people before, dad or granddaddy had amassed a huge amount of wealth, and then it was all gone just that quickly. So you see, we trust sometimes in the wrong thing. We need to trust in the Lord. The name of the Lord is a strong tower. All right. Before destruction, the heart of a man is humility. So we need to humble, right? Again, going back to chapter 16 and verse 18, said pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before fall. Here's the converse of that. Before destruction, the heart of a man is haughty, and before honor is humility. So again, he's emphasizing that idea that we've got to watch our hearts always, humble ourselves. Verse 13, he who answers a matter before he hears it is folly and shame to him. There have been times in my life when I've interrupted people, didn't hear the whole story, gave them my 2 cents worth, and then when I heard the whole story, I sit back and said, I'm sorry, I had to open my big mouth. We need to listen, and we need to listen very strongly. So we've got to hear it, and again, there's that idea. So we need to speak cautiously. We need to humble our heart. We need to speak cautiously. And then verse 14, the spirit of a man will sustain him in sickness, but who can bear a broken spirit? And again, we've heard that before. The idea of the broken spirit, the person that is struggling. Again, the implication, believers, we should be careful that we don't wound a brother's spirit, because that could injure his body. That could just injure him in ways that we don't even realize. And sometimes the things that we say and do may be irremediable. So we've got to work that out. Finally, we've got to deal with the disputes. It's hard to deal with disputes sometimes, but listen to what he says. The heart of the prudent acquires knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeks knowledge. Man's gift makes room for him and brings him before great men. The first one to plead his cause seems right until his neighbor comes and examines him. I love that passage. When you hear the first thing, you think, well, yeah, you're right. And somebody comes up and tells us something else. Oh, well, I didn't know about that, right? Casting lot causes contentions to cease and keeps the mighty apart. And again, we've gone back to the idea that before, in the Jewish way of thinking, casting lots was controlled by God a lot of times, as far as they were concerned. A brother offended is harder to win than a strong city, and contentions are like the bars of a castle. A brother offended is harder to win than a strong city. A man's stomach shall be satisfied from the fruit of his mouth, the produce of his lips he shall be filled. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit. He who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. The poor man uses entreaties or begs. The rich man answers roughly. A man who has friends must show himself friendly. And there is a friend who sticks what? Closer than a brother. So when we're talking about this, think about this for a few moments. Let's kind of go back and see what he's trying to emphasize. It's the idea of how do we deal with disputes. Number one, chapter 18, verse 16, a man's gift makes room for him. So it's the idea that, offering gifts. It's not necessarily a bribe, but it's simply giving a gift to a person of influence who needs their help, okay, to succeed some purpose. So again, he says there's nothing wrong necessarily with that, and that brings him before great men. So again, there's nothing wrong about giving gifts and offering gifts that way. Number two, evaluate the evidence, right? The plaintiff who states his case first pours the evidence which makes him look the best, right? The lawyers in a trial, even if the man is a murderer on trial for murder, his attorney is going to make him look good, that it was society's fault that he made the decisions that he made, or it was the wrong upbringing, or, and he will blame everybody in the world because this man killed this man, but it wasn't his what. And if you listen to some of these sad stories, you're sitting there just your heart's breaking because, wow, yeah, this guy's really had a hard life, but does that justify him taking another man's life? No. But you see, some folks lose sight of that and they judge him accordingly. So again, we've got to listen to the whole thing. And then let's suppose for a moment you've got the defense attorney giving this defense for his client. Then the prosecuting attorney actually does what? Brings the evidence. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, we didn't know that whenever he murdered somebody, he shot him 3 times, stabbed him, and then run over him with a car. That's over and beyond, and I'm joking there. Obviously, I'm making it worse. But you see, that sometimes we're told that this guy was so loving and so kind that He was forced to do it, but then whenever you actually hear the events of the crime itself, it's like, really? Well, there's no justification for this whatsoever. We don't even have to do that when it talks about trial in court. We survey evidence all the time, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
Every time an advertisement comes on television, we're thinking about the evidence. Will this really change my life, like it says?
Yeah.
Will a brand new iPhone make my life a whole lot better? No, but we buy into it, right? We've got to cast the lot. And again, think about this idea. Now, in my Bible, that's verse 17 and 18 is really broken apart, but they could be put together here. Okay, so in other words, when I say they're broken apart, there's bigger spaces suggesting the idea that there are different thoughts, different paragraphs. But it's not. It could be that casting the lots could have reference back to verse 17 where he's talking about you're having to make a judgment call. And again, if you were a Jew at that time, you would be thinking about God helping you to make the right and the best decision in that circumstance, right? So they could agree to have their differences settled by means of the lot, believing, as I said earlier, that this would be decided by God. And as I said, all I've got to do is go back to Acts chapter 1 when they chose Matthias to take Judas' place. So think about that from that viewpoint, and let's not, we think of casting the lot more often than not, shooting of the dice or something like that. But in a biblical sense, sometimes as they looked at it, it was God's intervention in their affairs. All right? And again, think about it. A brother offended is harder to gain than a strong city. The closer the kinship, the more bitter the enmity. So you have a good friend and your friend stabs you in the back. And you're sitting there not just with what the action was, but because they were your friend. Because you trusted them. You really trusted them, and now you don't even want to be in the same room with them. You don't want to be nowhere near them because they have hurt you so bad. So that's, again, what he's suggesting here in this respect. And could it be, again, that all of these verses, 17, 18, and 19, are, again, tied together, as opposed to being separated in that respect? And the brother that is offended is going to be harder to gain back. And there are some friendships and so forth that has been broken over the years. So, again, what do we need to do? Watch what we say. In the 2021, a man's stomach shall be satisfied from the fruit of his mouth, and the produce of his lips he shall be filled. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit. So again, we've got to realize that we've got to be careful with what we say. We've got to be careful all the time, thinking about others, speaking cautiously, and always thinking about the reality of that. A friendship of years could be broken just that quick. And we've got to make sure that we're very careful. As I was standing here for a moment thinking about this, how many of us have friends that we could say that have been friends for years and years and years? Friends come and go. I had friends when I was in high school. I stay in touch with them a little bit through Facebook, but that's about it. I have friends that were members of the church in Bowden and so forth, and I still count them my friends. I think that if something come down to it, I could call upon them again. But again, we get separated. We're living in a culture that we don't stay with friends for years like we once did, and then something happens, and again that friendship is broken, and it's just about irreparable to try to bring it back. Right? That's what's so tough about all of this. It is. What are some foundations? Verse 22, he who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. So a godly marriage, a good wife is meant. Think about our wives and how much of an asset they really are to us. Think about how sometimes we as husbands take them for granted. And we need to be very careful. The older I've gotten, me and my wife's been married 37 years. It's nowhere near like others. but she's my best friend, my confidant. And, you know, I think back on the times that I've heard her, and I weep even still to this day about some of the things I've done. I'm just grateful that I have her every day of my life. I'm grateful that I have her. And again, I understand what he's trying to say here. I have truly obtained favor from the Lord. Again, godly mercy. Entreaties the poor speak, and the rich person answers with strong words. Again, the rich sometimes are not that sympathetic toward the poor, are they? So again, it's, you know, they're warning, this proverb is warning the rich not to allow their wealth to suppress human compassion. And then he said, a man who has friends must himself be friendly. Okay, we've got to, if we're going to have friends, we've got to be friendly. That's just all there is to it. A man of friends has a lot of friends. Some of those friends might do him harm and bring him to ruin. So it's not the quantity of friends, but the quality of friends that are important here. And he says here, there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. We'll stop there. We covered more tonight than we did last week. We've still got about 10 more minutes for the class, but I don't want to get on into chapter 19. And like I said, hopefully next week we'll get on and probably get through that section and then jump on over into chapter 22, and we'll start looking at some of these others as we go through here. Spend maybe maybe 2 more weeks on Proverbs, and then get into the book of Ecclesiastes. Okay? Thank you. Yeah, we're moving. I do try to move a little bit quicker tonight, but we are moving along. Thank you again for all you do and your study. And my prayers are that God will bless all of us as we're striving to be what God wants us to be. Amen? Amen. Thank you. Mark, we're going to stop there at chapter 19, okay? And that's all right, brother. And
Sorry about that.
Well, the way I've got it now, this is last week. This week was about the midterm. So I'm going to take maybe 1 or 2 more classes for that, Proverbs, and then we're going to go on into Ecclesiastes, no matter where we are. We're going to have to get into it. We're going to have to touch it somewhere down the line. So I'm going to try to cover it as quick as I can as we go through here. All right. Thank you, brother. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Have a good one.
All right, brother. Bye-bye.